reviewing this sheet here and what it has to say. And pretty much I always like to start off with, you know, where do our tax dollars come from and how are they spent? And I think really the biggest takeaway right here is almost 50% of how we spend our tax dollars is on education. Certainly education is extremely important. I know it's important in my household, and it's a big part of what we spend our state budget on. And so therefore, when we do impact things that we do at the state level, then you are going to oftentimes be impacting education. So that's why they go hand in hand, quite frankly, very often. I believe that Republicans are governing the way that they said they would. They're making government smaller, more efficient, creating more economic opportunity. I think that we see that in the results out there, and I think all you have to do is look at unemployment, and you can see that we are basically in full employment. I always say when I was first campaigning to be in the assembly, it was all about we need jobs. Now it's really all about we need people to fill those jobs. Now, you know, they're both a problem, but one I think is much less of a problem than the other one. And really that ties back to the whole issue of education. When I got elected to this job in the 20th Senate District, I toured every school district in the 20th Senate District because I really wanted to see, as a former school board member myself, what adjustments they were making to today's economy, to understanding that, you know, not everybody is on track for a 4-year degree. Not everybody has to accumulate a whole boatload of debt. There's a lot of great family supporting jobs out there that don't require that. And are we really retooling our education to accommodate that? And I came away thinking that we're starting to do a pretty good job of that, as well as touring our technical schools too. So part of growing that economy that I think Republicans stood for is reducing the burden on the private sector of taxes. I believe, and I know Rob does too, that more money in your pocket in the private sector, that's where we're going to create wealth, that's where we're going to create jobs, that's where we're going to create opportunity. You know, when we decide we're going to extract more money from the private sector, send it to Madison, and then let people there who are smarter than us decide how it should be redistributed. I don't think that's the way, you know, that's our country was made great in the direction we should be headed in. And I believe we are seeing, you know, the fruits of that with the growth that we are seeing in the state here. And some of the things that we've done and is eliminated some taxes. We've eliminated the state forestry tax, not just reduced, because we've seen sometimes when you reduce taxes, they have a way of coming back. But when you make them go away totally, that has a much lower propensity. Eliminated state forestry tax, eliminated the alternative minimum tax, the AMT, which we're only one of about 5 states that still has that. The federal government has done away with that now too. And also one thing that was very important to me was eliminating the personal property tax. I didn't win that all, but I got about 1/3 of it repealed, because right now there's 52 exemptions to personal property tax. So if you had a big enough business group that you could lobby Madison and you could get your personal property tax gone, it's gone. But right now, the personal property tax that remains is just really on small business downtown Wisconsin. And I don't think that's right. It's a very unfair tax. It's very inequitable. Some places it's applied, some places it's not. In fact, many municipalities will tell you that it costs more to process and collect that than it does even from what they benefit from it. Our neighboring states don't have it. We shouldn't have it either. To me, it's just one more target on the back of small business. We've gotten rid of part of it. The rest of it needs to go away. I think the result is we've seen Tax Freedom Day, you know, the day we're all done supposedly paying the average tax in the state of Wisconsin, is 8 days earlier this year. And all these things were done while the governor still maintained his pledge that the property taxes on a median priced home in the state of Wisconsin are no more than they were in 2010. So again, that was also putting pressure on our homeowners, on our elderly, and on people on the margins. And I think that has helped quite a bit. Couple things that the governor's done that I can't say I was maybe 100% on board on. I thought there was maybe a different way, but I think I'm happy it got done nonetheless. And that is the $100 per child tax rebate. I probably would have preferred maybe lower rates overall and not having ever collected the money, but as long as we've decided that we have more than we need to operate, I'm happy to give it back to the private sector. I think it should be in your pocket and not in some bureaucrat's war chest to decide what they want to do with it. Another thing, and again, these things, you know, I think they send the message that things are working in Wisconsin. They're not big, but they're good, and there's a lot of things that have been big that we have gotten done. But another thing, again, it's a nice gesture, $75 or less purchases, sales tax holiday for going back to school. Again, that's a time when a lot of families are laying out a lot of money, and that's a benefit that I think will help there. And again, not a big deal, and but something I think that sends a good message. One issue that I got very involved with right on early, and is a big portion of what we also do with our budget, is our state transportation, the Department of Transportation. We all know we need good roads for a whole lot of reasons, for economy, for quality of life, and for safety. We need good roads. And what frustrated me is, session prior, I had a number of reforms that would have saved transportation dollars. They were just common sense reforms. I mean, I run a business, and I know, you know, when you can save money and not impact a service, that's what you do. And there were things that we could have been doing, and I was advocating for these things. I was getting pushback from some people, and I couldn't figure out why. I know there's special interests, and they're powerful. But then we finished our session, and who were the first people to say we needed to raise taxes for transportation? Those very same people that were pushing back against me, that said we shouldn't be doing these reforms. Well, that didn't make any sense to me at all. We started digging in a lot to this whole thing and really found out there are a lot of ways our transportation department can be saving money, and they're starting to do that now. We have a great secretary now. His name's Dave Ross, and he's really brought some innovative ways of thinking to our Department of Transportation that we haven't done in the past. We now have full repeal prevailing wage. You know, it never made any sense to me why for government work you had to pay one rate, but for market, for any other type of work, you paid the market, which was less. That didn't really make any sense to me. So we've done that. We've also looked for reforms with a Fed swap. Right now, whenever you have as little as $2,000 of federal money in any road project, it immediately kicks in all these federal requirements. There's multiple levels of bureaucracy that come on, creates additional costs as well as additional standards. In fact, some people reject the federal money because in the end, as local municipalities, because in the end it'll make their project even more expensive with the federal money. So what we need to do is take that federal money, and instead of just sprinkling it all around the state, let's pull it all together, put it in these mega projects, and then take that state money out of the mega projects so we can actually build a lot of those projects at oftentimes 20, 30, maybe even 40% cheaper without that federal money in it. Now, I also believe, too, that we need to we've spent a lot of money on the mega projects, on the big freeways. I mean, how often do you hear somebody say, gee, that freeway is not big enough or wide enough, we need a bigger one. And I believe that now what we're starting to do, and we need to do more, is taking that transportation money and moving it more to local roads. And I think that's where we have the issues, and I think that we've put a ton of money into the megas for a while now, and I think we need to redirect that some. So that's one of the things I believed in also. Just on the last thing, on education, the governor increased education spending this session, $636 million. And part of that was increasing general school aids to, again, keep those tax rates down. That is something that is, did we need to do that? I guess I'm not sure. We'll see if we get better results because of that. But that was the decision that was made, and it was a huge increase in spending. But again, all that with reducing taxes, and also we've had the lowest bonding in over 20 years in the state of Wisconsin. So those are all positive things. It's pretty hard to gripe about that. Again, it translates to $250 this year and $204 next year per pupil in our schools. One thing we did too that I was a believer in is we have low revenue districts. The school funding formula has been in place for a long time, but we changed how we paid for that in the early 90s. And at that point in time, school districts that were frugal were kind of locked in at a certain amount. And some of these, there's a number of districts that are in our district here that are spelled out, and it shows you the variation between per pupil spending that's out there. For instance, a Slinger, their per pupil spending was below $9,400. And that is what we have since done is now for those, instead of, we want to reward those districts who have been very frugal with their school spending. And they don't have to do it, but now they have the ability to raise some more money locally if they choose to, if they need to. And again, there are other people that are way outliers. Again, you got Milwaukee at over $15,000. We understand there's a lot of issues. We'll get to questions. But you know, that's just a stark comparison. And I do talk about school choice. I'm a huge supporter of school choice. I think every kid deserves a fair chance to get a good education. I'm sorry, in MPS, there are kids there who don't have a chance to get a good education because a big portion of that system is failing. I know that sounds harsh, but that's just the way it is. And when we see apples to apples, kids of the same economic stature in MPS versus a choice school, we are seeing better results out of those choice schools. And actually, when you look at it, what a choice school gets is about $7,500. MPS is at $15,000. You know, you can argue a little bit about the numbers, but for significantly less money, they're turning out better students at those choice and charter schools. I support that. Again, it's all about balancing school expenses with taxpayers. Again, education's a big part of what we do at the state. And one thing I've been engaged on is referendum reform. I think our referendums need to be more representative of the entire community. I was able to get legislation passed that now says our referendums should be on the days when we have elections with high turnouts and heavy participation, i.e. our regularly scheduled elections. There's been elections for school referendums scheduled actually the day after Christmas. I mean, all for a purpose, but this way we'll get broader representation there. And I do think that, I'll close with this, that with referendums, we have net shared revenues that pay for our schools. It's our school funding formula. Our Wisconsin Supreme Court has held it to be constitutional. And what that school funding formula does is it equalizes things. So therefore, some districts get, say, 20 cents on the dollar from the state, some 30, some 40, some 50, some 60, some even more. Now, when we have these referendums, there's two different types of referendums. There's capital expenditures, where you want to build new buildings, or there's where you want to exceed the revenue, the spending caps that all our other districts are living by. Now, you vote for that locally, and that's great. You should have that opportunity. But what happens with net shared revenue, say you're getting 50 cents on the dollar from the state, you locally have decided to exceed the spending caps, but by X amount. But 50% of that X amount that you're exceeding as spending cap is actually coming from the rest of the taxpayers in the state of Wisconsin. Now, is that fair? When those other taxpayers, many of them, most of them, are actually living under the school formula, and they're being prudent with their dollars, but yet when another district decides they need to spend more, we are all subsidizing that. I think that's something that we need to look at. I feel the same way about capital expenditures, that again, you vote for it locally, but maybe we need a little more emphasis on paying for it locally when you vote for it locally, but that's really not the case. So with that, those are items I wanted to touch on. I'll turn it.
Law, but the rules and regulations that kind of drive that law are drafted by the administrative people. And lots of times they can have millions and millions and tens of millions of dollars worth of impact that we didn't intend, but because DNR or DOA or some other agency drafts all those rules and guidelines, has a tremendous impact on it. So now that anything that has over a certain level of expenditure has to come back to us for approval, which is a huge, huge win for the taxpayers. Because now it's no longer kept referring to the bureaucrats in Madison, you know, and everybody means well and is doing it, you know, I think a good job, but sometimes the legislative intent doesn't always get carried out. So to have us have another kick at it before it actually gets codified, whether it's development laws or tax law or anything else, I think is a big one for us. Another big item that we did this last session was school safety, and I'm sure many of you heard about that. We'll take questions on that. Also, corrections reform with Lincoln Hills, going away from kind of this method of we take the worst violators and ship them way up to Lincoln Hills or to someplace else, and we kind of keep some of those juveniles locally, but the families are far away. So now we're going to go to more of a regional approach with juvenile justice. Try and get more of the kids treatment instead of just sending them off to northern Wisconsin or someplace else, leaving them for a couple of years. Now it'll be more regional based and try and get them to help. And a couple of the guys here in the room I know have been very, very helpful with the opiate problem. And if we don't fix that, the long-term cost of these kids going to these correctional facilities and not getting the help and treatment they need and the job training turns into millions of dollars. And I mean millions per child. So that's something that we're really focused on. We have a lot of work yet to do there. As Senator Stroebel said, our emphasis used to be on job training. We're still dedicating a lot of money to that, but we're refocusing our efforts now, especially in light of the Foxconn deal. Right now we have 100,000 job openings on average, and we're only graduating 40,000 students a year. We have a population problem and a training problem. So we're dedicating ourselves at the state level to try and recruit people in, create a tax environment where they'll want to come here. You know, not just the employees, or not the employers, but the employees as well. Because nobody's going to succeed if we don't bring people in here. You know, and I don't want it to sound like it's all high-level state stuff. Senator Stroebel and I have done a lot of legislation that affects local government. We did a couple bills. I think you were the lead on the Schlag bill just a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you did it with me. It's hard to keep. We do a lot of bills together. We did one on renewable energy, which will help charter recapturing a lot of the heat. If you've ever been in charter, it generated a lot of heat. So now that's considered a renewable energy source. They could recapture that and put it back into the grid. We did a bunch of bills on bonding and getting rid of duplication to save municipalities like Saukville thousands of dollars. The health department bill is another one for local governments. I don't know if you saw the news graphic today. Grafton's put a moratorium on development for 120 days. That's a bill I did as well. And Grafton was lagging behind the times, and when you do a development, there's permitted uses, and many times there's conditional uses, meaning if you meet these certain requirements, you as a property owner should expect that you should be able to build that. That was not the case across a lot of communities here in the state. You would look at that and go, okay, well, I can meet those setbacks, I can do this, and I can do this, but you couldn't get the approvals because they would start adding on more and more approvals. So we changed that law, saying, if you offer up a conditional use, you need to be crystal clear what those requirements are so that somebody moving into that community to open a business or do something knew the rules from day one. So tuition freeze at the university system. I know everybody thinks we're actually cutting, but UW's expenditures have grown every year. They're not spending less. You know, when it first started with the tuition freeze, they were pulling out of reserves. They're still doing that, and they're finding better ways to cut their costs administratively with healthcare and other things. So next session, so we're not focused just on last session, tax reform is going to be a huge issue. If any of you understand the tax code, then you're a lot smarter than I am. You know, so when you go to the grocery store, this candy bar is taxable, but this one's not. Bottled water can be, ice cubes can be. Everything's very, you know, hard to understand. You know, and some of you are in the landscaping business. If you have a tree cut down, maybe you can help me out with this. It's a good analogy. If you have a tree fall down and cut it, that's not taxable. But if you cut it for firewood, it becomes taxable. If it's landscaping, it's taxable. So contractors have had a very difficult time determining what is a taxable event, what isn't. So we want to simplify that whole code and get rid of a ton of exemptions. You know, if you own a ski lift, all the equipment, if you buy $1 million worth of ski lift equipment, for some reason that's exempt for sales tax. So there's all these carve-outs that we want to get rid of and bring everybody's taxes down lower. So minimum markup, I don't know if you touched on that. That's another big one we'd like to get rid of next session. Transportation reform, and I know Senator Stroebel touched on that. We are very limited with our delivery method options here, and we want to change that. There's a lot of things we could do by empowering our local communities. One of the things I'm hoping is any project that DOT or the locals have that's $5 million or less could be block granted right to the communities. I can send anybody a report. There was a project, Christopher, back, it's at Oak Creek area on Janesville Road. They did 1 mile of road with federal dollars, and the paperwork ran literally from here to the wall. I have pictures of it. And they did the next mile, exact same roadway, and the paperwork was a couple stacks. But anytime federal money is involved, the project goes up 30–40%. and that was the transportation swap Dewey was talking about. So those are all the things we need to do, so there's still a lot to do next session. I think that one will take questions, right?
We've got some questions here, Rob. I don't know if you want
I'm
to
sure.
read a few off and
Yeah. Oh, start?
Yeah, I got to his letter there, and I was kind of reading about next session, you're gonna be dealing with probation and people who don't pay child support. And then there was something in there about educating people in the inner city, and it drew light to the situation we have in our county with the current criminals that are coming up and creating crimes, and it extends in the law enforcement communities, because the work we do, it gets up farther than this even. And I was just wondering what you guys are working on for that, and because when I read in there, I seen a lot of holes in the system. Nobody seems to want to mention what the cost of these drugs are doing to all of us. And I thought that when he started talking about education, all of these, and I know a lot of these schools that have a lower enrollment are competing for these troubled kids because there's more money being spent on what we call special ed now. Everybody's considering special ed. But we are not doing anything to prevent and help these kids along and get them out of these situations where they're becoming troubled kids because of the environment they're in. And quite frankly, this in Ozaukee County alone, in the last since 12 till now, our daily jail population went from about 125 a day, we're bumping 200 now. This drug situation is so under control. We're not organized. We have no rapport with the Milwaukee County, where a lot of this starts from. And I have friends that are probation officers down there, and you talk about probation down there. Some of these kids meet their probation officer in a parking lot. They don't check on their houses and stuff. All of that's, what's ever going on down there is affecting us, and it's starting to show here what it's all, you showed statistics of all these people coming up there, and a lot of these people we have people going for heroin down to the city, and they're bringing up people they do drugs with down there up into our communities. So I guess as a citizen, I'd like to see us get a lot more organized about this and sit down and talk about some of these situations. I just happen to be very well versed on it because of all the time I spent on it since 2010 when I joined the Criminal Justice Corroboration Council. But our heroin task force in this county is just gone into nothing now, and the main thing that I always preached for was organization. We're not organized, and I just think our government is failing its citizens miserably. Because you have to be conservative about it, there's a way to do it, but you also have to be fiscally conservative. Just one heroin baby is costing taxpayers $10,000 a day, and that can be a 6-week treatment period, and we don't know how many we have in this county at any given time. And I just wish that you guys would, put something together here and try to get more organized about dealing with these problems, because it'll help this situation going on with what you're talking about in Washington County with their increasing jail population.
All right, I can start. So, you named off a lot of stuff. So last session we talked about repeat offenders and what we're doing about it. So what was happening is if I was out on probation and committed another crime or was arrested for another crime, I wasn't hauled in automatically. Now you will be, and you'll be up, your parole will be revoked, 90-some% of the time. You're going to be hauled in before that probation officer, before a judge. What was happening though is nothing. So a lot of these young kids that were doing the carjacking and those events were staying out there, multiple offenses, and prolonging those court cases. So that was one issue we fixed.
That focus was on repeat and violent offenders.
Right. Yep, no, jump in anytime. Just last week, and Paul, I agree with you, I was at the county jail. You're right, we're over 200. We need to do something about it. So we have, not just in the last few years, or since 2008 when the economy was bad, but over the last 20, 30 years, we have spent virtually nothing on modernizing our jail system. So think about that. We talk about transportation, investing in that, but we have done nothing. We have jails and prisons that are just falling apart and aren't meeting the modern needs that we have now. Like you said, counseling, treatment, and diversion. So we pushed hard. It didn't get done at the end. A couple of things that we were working on was adding more DAs. If you talk to our district attorney here in Ozaukee County, which I think, quite frankly, is one of the best, he does a good job. But he doesn't have the manpower now to get heavily involved in these treatment and diversion programs. So we had a bill out there was, I think the fiscal was $4 or $5 million, a lot of money, but it would have added 50-some DAs across the state, which would have freed up some more time for them to get more involved in this, get more involved with their probation officer. We're also working on legislation regarding expungement. As you guys, many of you know, these kids commit crimes at 17, 18, 19 years old. I got a call yesterday, somebody 40-some years old, committed a crime when he was 17, charged as an adult, and is still having a hard time finding employment because of that. So we need to work on our expungement laws after a certain period of time, that you can go back and visit the presiding judge or a new judge and plead your case and see what can be done, you know?
Yeah, but you won't find a single prosecutor in the states that they're all gonna tell you the same thing, and we've talked to a lot of them. You can't prosecute your way out of this problem.
No, we're not going to.
And you know, we condemn the drug dealer for selling the drugs, but the deals the police make with people on drugs to get them off so they can get away, so they get arrest more people, an untreated person is going back on the street only to fail again. We have people in jails that aren't getting proper treatment, and they come out 2 or 3 days and they're overdosing. I mean, this is a heavy-duty thing, because we just aren't sitting down and examining the problem. We're not organized, and we're not capturing everything, collecting taking inventory of all the things, all the external forces that are driving this situation.
Well, mental health expenditures.
And that's coming from drugs also.
But we spent a lot more money on mental health and trying to push that down to the school level, because that's where it starts, and you know that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the jail literacy program, and the statistics on the kids, even in Ozaki, they only have 8 to 10 kids in that program, sometimes 12 at a time. But the recidivism rate goes, I mean, it's just way down if they can get their GED or something equivalent. What's the other one besides GED? Do you remember? I don't remember off the top of my head. But the statistics are overwhelming for these people that can get the treatment, get their GED, get their life back on track. The recidivism rate is like 3 times less. So I agree with you that we need to start focusing on that. You know, the opiate problem, quite frankly, I think jumped up and, pardon my French, bit us in the ass. And I think everybody was asleep at the switch thinking it'll never happen here in Osaki County. It'll never happen in Washington County. But it has. It's just as bad here as it is in Milwaukee. You know, we're just much smaller. So I agree with you, and I think we did a good job this session, but there's still a lot to do. But it all requires money, and unless we get the economy coming back, which we're now doing, hopefully with now the low unemployment, tax revenue is going to go up and we're going to be able to invest more. So I think we're not doing a legislative council study on it this summer, but a lot of my colleagues are coming back with new laws, new rules to try and refocus us. And I think Michael Schraub, I think Boyke, who's a Democrat, came up with a good package on redoing the correctional facilities like Lincoln Hills and trying to bring in some of this new technology and new programming to try and bring down that recidivism rate. It doesn't happen overnight.
And I'll just add one thing too. You know, I don't know how much we can push down to our schools. I don't know how much we can push to our penal system and so on. What I really believe we need to do too is, at that most basic level, how do we make families stronger? You know, I mean, we've all seen the statistics. You can't deny them, and there's always outliers. But you have a greater propensity when you have a single-parent household of that child having more contact with law enforcement, having more mental health issues, or not attaining as high of an economic stature. And so therefore, we need to strengthen families. It's in the facts. You just see it with the numbers. And I think by creating an economic environment where people can succeed, that's one of the ways we can strengthen families and to disincentivize, you know, behavior that ends in a way that, you know, statistics have shown not in a good way. So even at that level, how do we strengthen families, and thus we've got stronger kids who can ultimately you know, resist some of these things that just happen in our society.
The problem with the drugs, though, it's a free market commodity. The supply is way too large and the cost is too low. And it's just like any commodity, gas, fuel, or anything. If you can raise the cost up, the consumption is going to go down. It's too cheap. And that's where we're failing as a government. We are not controlling what's all coming in.
Well, I listened to Jim Sensenbrenner yesterday, and he talked about controlling our border and how we're not controlling our border. and how we're seeing drugs come like crazy over there. Now, I know that's not the only place, they come from other places, but that's one of them if you want to talk about that issue of not controlling the supply. So,
All right, Connie?
Oh, I'm just curious how you're planning to do school safety. Clearly.
on what?
School safety.
School safety, well, we passed a bill, $100 million that's out there for schools to apply for grants to enhance school safety. I know a lot of schools have, if I was on the school board right now, and I was on the school board, but I probably would have a while ago spent that money on school safety. I mean, to me, that dollar is the most important dollar you can spend to make sure that your kids are safe in the schools, and I know a number of the schools in our districts have made those changes to greatly enhance the safety in their schools. So, but now we've got a pretty big pot of money for anybody who hasn't done it yet to receive a grant, so they'll be able to do something that maybe they should have done a while ago, but they'll have no excuse now.
And we started investing more money in the mental health issues. We also loosened up some of the regulations in place that, as far as counselors and licensing, because a lot of these students, you know, they just need somebody to talk to. And when I guess here's where I will get into an argument with some people is that are real school advocates, but they don't like school choice. And to me, that's the most fundamental thing. When you're dealing with a child that is troubled or has bad home life, giving them the option of going to a faith-based school or going to a private institution or being homeschooled takes them out, gives them the opportunity to get out of that school where they may be getting bullied or whatever the problem may be, or they have a bad reputation because of something that happened within the community with their parents. So to me, school choice is a big thing that we need to expand statewide, to let children move, let families move and be mobile with their school choices. You know, just north of here, I mean, northern Ozaki, they have a huge virtual learning school. You know, that works for some students, not for everybody, but the ways we used to educate our children are drastically changing every day. So not giving every parent that opportunity to decide what's the best environment for their children to learn, I think is the biggest thing we can do.
We got great schools in Ozaki County.
We're
fantastic
fortunate here.
schools, but not everybody in the state can say that.
And you touched on quite a few topics, even within my question.
Yeah, we could debate all of those all day, every day, you know.
Looks another question.
Oh, yeah. Maureen?
I'm Maureen O'Brien from Cedarburg, but of course I grew up in northwestern Wisconsin. And Barron County has had a drug court for a really long time. The big drug there was methamphetamine, which now Ozaki seems to be surprised that it's arriving here. I have some serious differences with the way that you look at the world. Now, I grew up in and around poverty, and just because people are poor, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily bad people. And I think, now let me finish, because what I really don't like about these town hall meetings is the public doesn't get to speak. We get to listen, but we would rather speak and try to get you to change your point of view. Let me just go back. My parents were both teachers. They were so poor that they couldn't make ends meet. And that meant that they bought groceries on credit at the corner grocery store. And thankfully, the grocery store treated us with respect, and that they treated us very well. Now, the reason they supported unionization of teachers is so that they could have a sustainable and living wage. And I think teachers have taken big hits under the Republican Party in the state, and getting rid of the union has made a tremendous difference in persuading young teachers not to stay in some of these districts. Now, let me talk about some of my issues here. My issue is public health. The first one is gun violence. And those of you who have not experienced this, you know, to put it in some, esoteric language. In Rice Lake, we had the hunting tragedy and we ended up losing 6 people, and these were legal guns. But despite that, gun violence is a huge issue across the United States, and we need to restore regulation on guns. Currently, I think there are like 96 people a day who are killed with gun violence throughout the United States. And some of that is suicide by gun. My second issue is hunger. I'm really disappointed that the Republicans imposed draconian measures against vulnerable people, and that's people who don't have any money. So they're making it tougher and tougher for them to find a way to get food. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. I think here at Saukville, it's either 200 or 300 families that are served by the family sharing, well, it's a church that has food. You know about that.
Yep.
Yeah. It is our responsibility to take care of our neighbors, and nobody should go hungry in America. And that's a quote from a relative of mine that owned a corner grocery store in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. And I think that you got to get rid of all of this extra stuff that people have to do to access social services. Give them the ability to get these social services, and let the professionals work with these people. You know, schools have gone out of their way to make sure that children are fed. And the school lunch program was instituted by Harry Truman when the troops, the recruits for the military, couldn't pass the basic physical. We've got a serious problem with poverty here, and it needs to be addressed. And it needs to be addressed in this county as well as throughout the state. And my last issue is Medicaid money. The governor needs to accept the Medicaid money. I have stage 4 cancer. I'm lucky that I have a health plan, but despite that, it is extremely expensive. And if you're somebody who's vulnerable, you do not have access to that. It's likely your choice is just to say, you know, I can't get treatment. So you need to think about this. I think you're spending way too much time talking to people who complain about taxes. To quote an old or early U.S. Supreme Court justice, taxes are what we pay for a civil society. So, you know, I'm happy to pay taxes, and I think most people that you talk to would say the same thing. You pay them, and you know, you let the elected officials supervise what's going, or you know, do the policy for these things, and you try to get the best and the brightest into government at every level. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll start. Economic opportunity is really what we need to provide. I think Lyndon Johnson with the Great Society and the anti-poverty programs that he launched, we've seen have been abysmal failures. It's time to do something different. And I think these are the things that we're trying to do, to incentivize work, not to incentivize not working. That's really what this is all about, incentivizing work, because we know when people are able to provide for themselves, that is a much better situation. So that's really what we're focused on here. You know, as far as just to try to kind of remember some of the things you talked about, this is the first time in the state where any and everybody who's at the poverty level or below gets free health care. Badger care, it's for anybody. There used to be waiting lists for that, and people weren't getting on it. Now anybody who's at the poverty level or below gets free health care in Wisconsin. And if you're above that, we have Obamacare, of course. So I do believe that, you know, whether you like that or not, believe me, there's a lot of reforms we can make to changes to enhance the delivery of medical services. I do believe that people have the ability to have their health issues taken care of. Like I said, we've got a lot of fixes, but with that Badger care, with Obamacare, I mean, it wasn't something I advocated for. Maybe it was something you advocated for. You know, I thought that was going to be the answer, but maybe it's not. I don't believe that it is. As far as food, you know, food stamp growth has grown immensely. But that's because, as you said, people haven't been able to provide for themselves. Well, why haven't they been able to provide for themselves? I think we have plenty of economic opportunity out there now that people should be able to provide. And I think if they don't have the skills necessary to engage in the job economy of today, we've got plenty of training and educational opportunities for them to do that. And all along, while they are working to better themselves through education, or if they're not able to, they have access to food stamps, they have access to that safety net that we provide. But we want to see that they're doing their share to better themselves. I mean, if someone is on drugs, look, they're not going to be able to get a job if they're on drugs. So there's nothing punitive here. If you're on drugs, you need to go and get help, and you need to work on that. And if you're willing to get help, we're willing to continue to support you. But if you're not willing to help kick a drug habit or something like that, then are you really serious about trying to help yourself and get a job? That's what we talk about incentivizing work and not incentivizing staying home. I think we made some real good changes in terms of, there was always the cliff, the welfare cliff they called it, where you'd be receiving benefits, and once you got over a certain amount, wham, they all went away. Well, we've begun to address that now. So as you're receiving benefits, and once you start working, as you make more, it eases down. So it's not just falling off the table, because I hear from employers all the time, I'd love to have somebody full-time, but they say they only want to work part-time, because if they work too much, they're going to lose their benefits. Well, how do we fix that? That's where we start ratcheting things down as they're able to provide more and more for themselves. These are some of the disincentives that are inherent in the government system that we have now that we want to fix, that I think are going to lead to better outcomes for all. I mean, those are just some of the things I can't, some issues you want to touch on there?
Sure. Yeah, you hit on a lot of things. We've exchanged emails and texts and everything else over the years. So one of the things, and just on a personal note, I take great offense, and as I think most people would, when people imply that we're not sympathetic to the poor. I will, there was a scene in Jaws where the sheriff and the cantankerous old guy are comparing scars and wounds, and you want to play that game? I'll play that game with you. I grew up very, very poor. And so did my father in Western Wisconsin, So when you talk about families with disabilities and needs, that was my family. So I'm very keenly aware of the needs of those people. So I don't ever want to do anything that's going to hurt them. But I'm on Medicaid, and you're right, we need to educate people that use the services. People that only go to the emergency room because they think that's their only viable option. Go anywhere from, it was like 10 times a year. They go to the emergency room, which triples the cost because they don't know any different. So we created a pilot program a couple of years ago, and it's proven those visits go down dramatically. The cost goes way, way down because we put them with a primary care doctor to address all of their concerns so that they don't feel the need to run to the doctor. That's not national health care, that's just educating people on what's available to them in the system. So we need to drive the cost down. So when you say we're sent to Madison to oversee your tax dollars, I take that personally. I do watch that money. And it's hard for me to say we should spend more in this area when I know the money we have is not being spent wisely. There are a lot of things that we can do. And some of the things that we talked about, quite frankly, require federal waivers. We just don't have the power to make those changes. A lot of the things when we talk about the cliff, if you make $40,000, this is your benefit. But if you make $40,000 $1, you lose all your benefits. That's insane. But we can't make those changes a lot at the state level. We need federal waivers. We're working towards that. So when you talk about hunger, through some of the legislation we did just last session, the need for food stamps has gone down a ton. And when you talk about our reforms, we're talking about you can't get food stamps if you own a house that's worth more than, what was it, $300 and some $1,000, or have $30,000 in equity in a vehicle. If you have $30,000 in equity in a car, I don't think you need to have food stamps. There's people that truly need these services. And there have been abuses, a ton of abuses, and we need to rein those in. And when you talk about taking the Medicaid money, we did just appropriate an additional $200 million in this budget by applying for a federal grant to bring down private pay rates. I don't think people are aware of that. I'm not sure we're going to get the money,
But we did apply for that through the federal government. Trying to think of the other things. I think that's most of them.
What's the poverty rate in Wisconsin? Do you know?
Off the top of your head?
I don't know, do you guys know by any chance?
Family of four, right?
Yeah.
They'll look it up.
Family
Yeah,
four,
we can
it's
get
like
that for you.
25,000.
I think it's,
Yeah.
but maybe not.
At 100 per family, because 220 and 53 would be school choice. 54,
Yeah.
that's 220.
Yep. Let's do 20. Yes, you're probably right. All right. Yep, Joe?
I'm a retired businessman, and I took the time to read the Legislative Fiscal Bureau's report on Foxconn. I'd like to ask you a couple questions.
Sure.
In there, there's about 25 years of cash flows, outs and ins. And instead of applying time value of money that just added up, if somebody had worked for me and done that, I would have fired them, and I know you know about time value of money. Second thing was that the state hired a consultant that said 50% of the money is going to stay within Wisconsin. And it said right in there, Walker told them to make it 100%, which obviously made the deal with it better. And then recently, Walker's been talking about comparing a heavy equipment manufacturer, Oshkosh Truck, which has all these heavy parts to bring in with something of its Foxconn, which has very low transportation costs and a worldwide network of suppliers. So to me, what has been done is we have a cost-benefit analysis. And I would ask you to go to the governor and say, why don't you give the people of the state an honest cost-benefit analysis of this massive project? So I hope you consider that.
Well, just to talk about Foxconn in general.
Well, could you talk about my specific questions, because it's right here, it was rigged. Now, what did you do about it? Did you read it? Did you do anything?
Yeah.
Because I know you're a smart guy.
Yeah.
So what did you do about it?
The reason why, just give it to you in a nutshell, why we think Foxconn is a good deal, because it's gonna pay back in the long run. And every penny that goes out the door is only on the basis of a job created or a capital expenditure that occurs. There's no blank checks written to this company. This company has to earn every one of the benefits that it's going to receive.
You know
Why, could you just rephrase your question, because I'm really not sure what
Okay,
your
my
question was.
question is, it was a rigged analysis. There's cost benefit page in here that was 25 years of cash flow. And instead of using present value, time value of money, they just added them up. Like $1 received 25 years from now is the same as $1 today. That's the first thing. That's a rigging. And why did you, I think the government should redo it.
Those fiscal analyses, as far as I'm concerned, in the real world, they don't mean much to begin with, because there's so many constraints that are put on those in terms of don't look at inflation, don't look at any other ancillary benefits. It's such a microscopic approach. To me, quite frankly, it doesn't mean much. We've seen studies from Milwaukee Metropolitan Association of Commerce that shows there's going to be a return of, I believe it's $18 on every $1 invested. And if quite frankly, do you think that warrants the investment, or it overblows
It
the
rigs it,
investment?
makes it too big. That Milwaukee, I looked at what the Milwaukee Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce did.
Yeah.
There was no report. They just made up numbers. There was nothing. There was nothing behind it. I know what the multiplier effect
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
and they just created a number,
Right.
and then they publicized it.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't like government picking winners and losers and crony capitalism and all that. However, you know what? When you have a transformational business, like it or not, and I don't really like it, but it's just the world we live in today. And I think we all know if 13,000 jobs are created there, and all the ancillary benefits that go along with that, all the other companies that it's going to be bringing to this state, and the economic growth, I think that the incentives that we are providing to this one company are going to be well worth their while.
One more thing. You're very general taxpayers. Okay, what you're doing is taking tax money from Zaki County and you're sending it down to Kenosha County.
Actually, we're not, because what we're doing is, when we provide those incentives for every job created, basically the taxes that each job will create will pay for those incentives. So that's really not what we're doing.
That was a made-up number. You're taking money from all the rest of the state and sending.
Like
it
I said,
to
that's
Kenosha.
really not true, because the incentives are paid when they are earned. And when they're earned on the basis of the tax dollars that those jobs will generate, as well as then the capital expenditures the economic growth that those things
Not here.
generate.
You're pulling economic growth and opportunity from here and sending it to Kenosha.
No, we're bringing a new transformational business to Wisconsin that's going to bring an industry here that hasn't even been on this continent, let alone in the state of Wisconsin. So that's what we believe
Well,
we're
I
doing.
disagree with you. I don't think you're putting your business hat on. But what do you think?
I had a number of concerns with the Foxconn deals, I'm sure Senator Stroebel did, and a lot of the things got changed prior to the final bill signing. And there was a lot that went on behind the scenes to make sure the deal got pulled in from what was originally promised. So there's clawback provisions in this bill, a lot of things. So I don't think we're...
You know, the clawback, there's no interest. If they don't do what they're supposed to do, let's say they get $500 million, all they do is repay $500 million in 7 years. It's like an interest-free loan. What kind of clawback is that?
But
I read the bill. I mean, I've read about it. I mean, it's nothing.
Yeah. They're not going to get that money if they're not providing the jobs.
Okay, but there's no clawback. It's just an interest-free loan.
But if everybody in this room, there's any of the money you pay, sales tax, income tax, et cetera, is not going to help Foxconn. It's only new money that they bring in.
I don't think of it like that.
Well, but that's the way it works. I mean,
I think
we
you're
had this
deluding
discussion.
yourself. I know a lot about this, and I don't understand how you can say taking taxpayer money from what do you call it, the general fund or whatever, and you send $3 billion there, okay, and you do it over time, but it's taking money that could be spent in Ozaukee County, it could be spent on opioids, it could be
That's
spent on
$3 billion
schools,
that
and you're
we don't
spending it
have right
on
now.
hiring 13,000 people 50 miles from here.
And it's, I guess in how you look at it, it's $3 billion that we don't have now. If I have a business right now that does X number of dollars, I know what that is. But if somebody new comes into my business, that's new money.
No, you're
That's
taking-
not money.
You're
No.
taking money from, it's not new money, that's my point. It's money that we're taking from all over the state, 70 counties, and we're putting it into 2 counties.
And again, when you create that job, that's when they receive the benefit. If they don't create the job, they don't receive the benefit. If they do the job for 2 years, and then they stop at the 3rd year, they're not
Well, I
going to
want
get
to
the
let you get to
benefit
some other
anymore.
questions.
I guess that's the big thing is,
Yeah.
and we fought early on to make sure it wasn't a grant, and I have a huge issue, and I know Senator Stroebel does too, with the way we administrate a lot of our grants in the state. Giving a company $200,000-300,000, sometimes tens of millions of dollars, hoping they create a job. That is not what Foxconn is.
It's pay as you grow.
Yes,
That's
so
what-
it's completely different than the way government typically does things. So that's why I was able to support that, because it's way different than the way we typically do things, where we throw money at a problem and then hope for a solution. If they don't do what they say, they don't get $1 from us.
You want another question?
Yep. Ms. Joe, Debbie.
Kind of on Foxconn as well, but I'd like to just raise a couple of questions about the opioid issue. A good friend of mine that's an attorney here in Washington has told me that the #1 cause of divorce in Ozaukee County is opioid addiction. So as much as we talk about drug dealers, I think we need to talk about doctors. You know, there's an article in ARP about senior citizens selling their painkillers, you know, I mean, so the overprescription, overprescribing of opioids, I think is something we have to look at as well, and I know that's incredibly complicated.
Oh, but we made a huge, and I don't want to, Christopher, do you remember the stats that went down 30-some% just over the last 12
A
months?
statewide database now we have, and when you make those
Yeah.
prescriptions to deal with doctor shopping and things like that, going to multiple spots now, when doctors are prescribing opioids, they need to sign into the statewide database, so it's tracked, you know, how much each doctor is dispensing, you know, who it's going to, and it's a much better way to
I
control.
know people that have
Yes.
left becoming pharmacists
Pardon?
because of that. They left the profession of pharmacy up in little towns like Ashland because people come in demanding these drugs. But anyway, I want to work off of Joe's question a little.
That's a point very well taken,
Okay.
and I think we've got some legislation that started to attempt to impact that situation.
I have a question I want to work off of Joe's thing on Foxconn, and that is, if, and you know, from what I've read too, the governor has said he didn't agree with the idea that any of the jobs or supply chains that are going to be dealing with Foxconn come from out of state. How is WEDIC going to monitor that? How are they going to make certain that all of the jobs and that's what it is, if it's 0% from our out of state, how is WEDC going to make it a transparent process so that those jobs are all from in the state? Because that's part of the money that's figured into this paying back, or breaking even in the year 2044. So how are they going, how is the Wisconsin Economic Development Council going to be able to monitor that?
As part of this legislation, they are required to hire outside auditors, just who would audit a Fortune 500 company. So those outside auditors, they're tasked with seeing that the provisions of this legislation are applied to, and seeing that all parties are following through. So that's how that will be dealt with.
You know, the two general contractors are from Germany and Rhode Island. That's, so right there.
And who will they be hiring to do that?
Well,
work?
yeah, but are
That's
they
where
gonna
the
be
bulk of it is.
profitable? The profits are going to Rhode Island, the profits are going to Germany, and so are the executive salaries. So right there, the 100% is violated with right out the
Sure.
box.
Again, to think that we could tell that entity, here's who you must use to build your facility.
I agree with you,
We're
but
not
Walker
that- we're
assumed
not-
it.
we're not
Your
at that
man
level.
assumed it. So you're
I don't
stuck
think
with
that-
him.
I
He
don't-
said
I don't
100%. It's
believe
right.
he assumed that.
Well, it's right here. I'll show you. It pays like 35. I can show you. It says right here. I'll show you
The
afterwards.
last thing I want to see, Ozaki Press did a really good job talking about the environmental hazards with Foxconn. And it seems to me in my non-business experience that Foxconn is more important to Wisconsin than Wisconsin is important to Foxconn. You know, they want our water. And so I really hope that that is monitored, and, you know, the air quality, all of these things. I mean, and Phil Shannon did a great job in the paper, so I'm not gonna, a lot of people read his editorials, but as a, you know, I've got grandkids, and I'm worried about all the stuff we've cleaned up. You know, I'm a Cedarburg resident. What about, how much money and time have we spent on the creek, for goodness sakes? So,
Mercury Marine has spent private dollars on it.
right, but they dumped it all in. So,
Right.
you know, that's my point. Anyway, thank you.
I guess, but just to address a couple of those concerns and some of the things that we fought hard on, we're not waiving any environmental standard. There's not, and nobody, I dare you to come up with one standard that's being waived. Some processing is being moved. We're not, so the agreement for the Racine Kenosha watershed area, as far as how much water can be pumped out of there, we're, even with Foxconn, we'll still be under those allowable limits that were established 20, 30 years ago, back when those areas had huge manufacturing facilities. So the millions, and I'm not denying it, we're talking millions and millions of gallons of water to be coming out of that watershed, is still less than what the water usage was 20-some years ago. So when we talk about that, were there exemptions made as far as processes? Yes. But the standards for air quality, water quality, nothing have changed. You know, and, well, those are built into the deal.
I'm
And
not
we,
sarcastic.
no, I know. We're all concerned about that. You know, in Foxconn, and I'll be the first one to admit it, you know, they're a business located in China. They met the standards they had to meet there. Were they the same standards we have here in the US or Wisconsin? Absolutely not. And we have not softened any of those standards for them. So, you know, if that comes up, you know, I would hope we could put that to rest, because that is just blatantly not true. That any standards, if somebody can prove that to me, I'd like to see it.
I'll work on that.
You work on that. You tell me one EPA guideline.
I can't do it right now, but I know
I
where
can
you're
guarantee
at.
you can't, because we haven't waived one environmental
Okay.
standard, period.
I'll take the
The
challenge.
process to get there has been, the standards have not. So I understand your concerns, Deb, but it's, we've gone through this at length. I'm comfortable that the DNR and the EPA are gonna be there lockstep the entire time, so. All right, so that's, Deb, did you have any, was it Foxconn? What was
Yeah,
your
that was-
first thing?
that was it.
Okay.
I talked about the opioid issues.
Okay, yeah, back to that. So just on the opioid thing, one of the things, we do ledge council studies every summer. I agreed to do one, so if anybody wants to serve on it, we're gonna be looking at child support and child placement. It's a huge issue, because when we look at opioid, and we look at gun violence, we look at crime, it's usually from broken homes, and I hate to label it, but the statistics bear that out, and it's from people not paying their child support and food. So we need to really focus on that.
I think you brought that up earlier, trying to make sure the home environment is as stable as it can be for that child. And if that means equal placement or not equal placement, those are the issues we're going to look at this summer. So keep that in mind. Jim?
Yes.
Which one?
Oh, Blaine.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Then Jim.
Well, there's two of us.
That's good. That makes it good.
You were your first.
All right.
Go ahead.
That's true, I was.
Jim.
I read the article on school choice in the paper, and you're accurate that none of it comes from property tax, but it does come from the equalization aid formula, right? And when you take that into account, there is a significant decrease then in money available to the public schools because it's going to the choice schools.
No,
Yeah.
no, that wouldn't be the case. Ethan, you want to just, this is your.
Is
area
that
of
Ethan?
expertise. I
How
mean, I
much
can-
comes in from, let's say, the 20th Senate District?
So the formula for school choice is this. A student enrolls in the choice program. There's an aid payment come back, and then there's a change in the revenue limit. There's a revenue limit adjustment. What happens, apples to apples, is the spending is authorities the same because the state pays the aid as if that kid were in the public school. So when you calculate equalized aid, you have two sides of the worksheet and you count your pupils. They do all of their counting of the pupils, and then they add in school choice kids, and the aid's paid. So the aid that's coming away from the school is the aid for that kid for the choice school. And then the difference is the property tax, which is lower than if it were on the revenue limit.
Now, you are going to have lower enrollment in those schools, and when you have lower enrollment, you have an
Right.
adjustment. But other than that, school choice is not hurting our public schools.
Well, we won't get into an argument over that right now, but, your figures, I think, include, when it says the aid going to the public schools, that you've got $10,500 in there. That also includes the property tax.
That's
They don't
revenue
get-
limit, yeah.
Yeah, see, they don't get, I think the average state aid is about $5,000, a little more, from the state aid formula, average. And of course, then what we're giving to the K-4, that's about 70-some hundred, and to the 9-12, that's about 8. But that's fine.
We should get, we've done an analysis on how many school districts did we do, basically all in the 20th Senate District, right? Let's get that to you, sir, and you can look
Yeah.
at that, and you'll be able to see, based upon what school choice in each district, what's coming out, what's going in, and the net effect it's having on each district. We'll get a copy of that, and you should
Good.
review
You
that,
got
and
it.
be happy to talk with you after that.
Do you support the increase in the gas tax? That was my other question.
As of right now today, no. And this is why. Historically, whether it's federal or state, at some point, are we gonna have to look at new revenues? Yes. Is it strictly gas tax? I think it's foolish. I know it's made a lot of people angry that we up the registration fees on hybrids and electric cars.
Must be the only state, huh?
Well, no, we're not. But one of the things I look at is whether you have a car or not, we all benefit from transportation. Your groceries get to the store via a semi, a truck, rail, somehow via transportation, we all benefit, whether it's public transportation or traditional transportation. That costs money. There's no denying that. The revenue has been decreasing because gas tax has been a declining source of income, as compared to inflation. So, do we have to do something? Absolutely, at some point. But I also know there is an incredible amount of opportunity to save money by taking that money and getting it down to the locals where it's best spent. And part of our problem is, and I can certainly send you the numbers, Jim, the largest percentage of our roads are town roads and local roads. It's not the big mega projects or the state projects. It's local, but that's not where we've been focusing our money. And too many municipalities, and I ran the county for 10 years here, so I know I made some of those same decisions. In order to get that 1-year budget or 2-year budget done, you can't, that's one of the things that we cut. The town of Saukville's a prime example. They didn't invest money for years and years, and then go crying to the state, and I hate to say crying, but that's what they did, to say, you need to help us out. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. When I ran the county, we had a matching grant program, and you wouldn't even take advantage of that, where we provide dollar-for-dollar services. So
a lot of that's a local control issue as well, where the local authorities have been unwilling to spend money on maintenance. And I think that's a mistake. And at the state level, at the federal level, I think it's almost criminal what we've done when it comes to expansion versus maintenance. You know, when you look at the DOT's budget for what we've done with expansion is to, and diverted money from maintenance, I don't think the crisis is as bad as everybody makes it out to be. We have just spent the money really poorly. We shouldn't be expanding our infrastructure in areas. I mean, if you go up north, there's sections, I mean, there's 3-4 lanes to accommodate tourist traffic, but we can't take care of the Marquette and the Zoo interchange the way we want. We can't take care of where most of our business traffic goes. It's just the way we spend money. And I think that's wrong. And when you
Maintenance
look
is
at
a big
We
savings. It is a
had,
big savings.
well over $1 billion in our transportation fund that was rated for other purposes to fill budget holes during the prior administration. I mean, that was not a prudent thing to do. And another thing is, I said we know we need good roads, but I'll tell you, I know that there's much better ways that we can be more efficient and more effective with that money. The last thing you do with government is say, oh, you're doing a poor job and you got extra money, here's more money. That's never going to solve the problem. They've got to cut, they've got to become efficient, and they've got to change their ways. You know, we're dealing with an antiquated world with our current DOT. That's starting to change, but once we get to where we've made our efficiencies and we've done all the right moves, if we need more money, then let's look at that. But I know we are not there yet with the money we have and using it prudently.
We're getting closer. But if you look back, and I'll tell you, go back and look at a lot of the local papers around here, when they went out for their road projects this year and even last year after we did some of the prevailing wage, and now which is a statewide thing, and right to work and some of these other things which I know are not incredibly popular with everyone. But the proof is there. Town and Grafton, a lot of these communities go, we just sent our projects out that we had in our mind for this year, and we have 15-20% less. So they were able to do more projects with the same amount of money because the cost of doing those projects came down. So I think we can address a lot of it that way. Long term, we need to come up with something different. The gas tax is not the solution. A lot of European countries, as of 2025, are banning combustible engines. So, you know, we need to look at the way we do business here in this country. I had a bill last session to help Tesla come in and do some other things. You know, the way we regulate, even franchise laws with dealerships, everything else, the way we regulate everything really prohibits the free market in a lot of cases. That's a whole different subject.
Can we do one more question and be here individually for a little while?
Yep, I got to go down to you, Brian.
Thanks. We talk a lot tonight about a lot of issues, so mental health, opioids, a lot of things, and we keep saying, you know, it's kind of on the schools, because when I got young, we don't focus on the idea, and I completely agree with you, I understand that that's kind of the point here. You also mentioned that there's more money going to schools, which again, we're very appreciative as well here in Wisconsin. Not quite the 2010 numbers that were cut, you know, due to that kind of that time period, or getting closer. One thing I want to just be careful with is when we hear numbers like things like more money's being spent, hopefully our scores go up. And that's a tough thing to hear because sometimes when we have these students today, it's not always about the skills and the scores, it is the mental health, it's helping them. So if you stop a student from attempting a suicide, that's never going to show up on any type of scoring. But right now, we have about 20% of this country who has some sort of mental health issue right now. Heck, the CDC has put out that everyone who turns 12 should then get tested for depression as far as a physical. So we're doing a lot more things. Yeah, hopefully it's not scores that look at, it's the overall schools going forward.
That's a measure, but there's a whole lot of metrics.
And again, I want to make sure that's always on the board correct. So my question goes back to this. In 2005 or so, when there's a high school opening, elementary school opening, there'd be 200 people applying for a job. Honestly, in schools now, we're lucky if we get between 10 and 40 applications. And the one thing I'm always hearing from people is, people in their first 5 year teaching, it's a great passion, it's my job, it's my career, everything, I'm a teacher, that's my whole life. And then we hear things like, yeah, but if we lose the pension, I can't stay in because I can't support my family. So my question is, why would we adjust or even touch our pension, the WRS one? It is fully funded, one of the best ones in the country. Other states actually should emulate what we're doing. when we pay into it as well. So again, it's my investments going into my future. So why would we touch the WRS in the future when it's strong now? It's one of the few things people in education, knowing that like when my father passed away last year, my mom now gets that pension for the rest of her life because he worked for 30 years to obtain that for our family. And without it, I don't know what you would do.
Well, we have a great pension, and nobody's talking about doing anything away with the pension whatsoever. But what is discussed is for new hires only, you know, sometimes you gotta make little adjustments up front so we continue to have a healthy pension. So for years, it's solvent and actuarially sound. And some of these reforms we're looking at now, for instance, you know, the early retirement age. I mean, people are living longer, they're working longer, Social Security age is going up and so on. You know, do we really need to have, you know, early retirement be as early as 50? You know, for some of our public employees. So these are things, and again, not existing employees, but new employees. So these are things we're looking at, and I think it really makes it more fair for everybody who's involved in the system. The other thing too is right now your pension is based upon your highest 3 earning years. I'll tell you what, I see politicians get appointed to a job that doubles their salary, and in 3 years, after a 25-year career, they just doubled their pension. Is that actuarially sound? No, it's not. So maybe instead of looking at 3 years, it should be 5 years. These are things that we need to do, A, to enhance the solvency of it, and B, to make it more fair. Because you're right, you are paying into it, and that's really what I think these enhancements need to be about. That's what my focus is on it, because I know a pension our pension is a great recruitment tool and retention tool for state of Wisconsin employees. And we need to keep that, and we value that.
But if we change it to 5 years, then when my contribution go down too, because I probably won't make as much money in 5 versus my last 3 years. I mean, again, obviously it's your highest 3, I get it now, it's not your last 3. But most people, it's your last 3 years. So if you put it to 5, then the calculation would go down for every middle class person. I don't get that.
It's always, but it needs to be actuarially sound. And when it changes for everybody, then it's across the board. It really shouldn't have an impact. But what it does is earnings were such that he can take out at that rate. Those are just some of the nuances. They're not big deal. Nothing's really moving the ball a lot, but again, it's for the long-term health. One thing we've seen too is the pension contribution is as high as 20% of the total salary for some of our jobs out there. And it's actually, I think it's gone up by 50%, I think, in the last 9 years. The contribution, and it's not dealing with who it's coming from. So really, we're seeing more and more of salary eaten up by pension. I'm hearing more and more from young people. It's like, look, I want to make more money, and I'm contributing to this pension that maybe I'll be in this job 5 years, maybe I'll be in this job 10 years. But I think those are things that we need to look at and react to somewhat also. That we don't have a job where it's eaten up so much by pension that the take-home just keeps shrinking. That's one of the concerns we've got also. Because I do believe we need great teachers, and we need to compensate them so we get good teachers, because that's the free market. And, you know, the issue of teachers being, you know, lower in terms of quantity, that's a nationwide problem. It's not just Wisconsin whatsoever. Yeah, it's nationwide.
Which is fine.
Yeah, but
we all address them.
Right, you said 10 to 20, what have you, applicants. Like I said, every day, I talk to employers, they wish they had one applicant. Not 10 to choose from, one. So, you know, it's a pervasive problem that I think is hitting everywhere.
And if you could, Dewey's been one of the most vocal people on the whole pension reform. It's important to know, and people, I don't know if they don't listen or don't want to listen, we're only talking about new hires. You know, we know, if any actuary can sit down and figure this out, the numbers that the pension fund has garnered for income have been incredible. I mean, they have done a phenomenal job. That's why Dewey's going to lead the charge to look at the way we invest other state funds, because our pension fund has done such a great job. So nobody wants to mess with the operations of the pension fund. But long term, we know it wasn't that long ago that it wasn't completely solvent, and the state had to come out and hit every county with a surcharge to backfill the pension fund, to keep those benefits. So that was not that long ago. So we want to keep it solvent. So to look at the retirement age, not of existing employees, but new hires, I think is prudent.
Right.
To look at that last 5 years, for teachers, you got a huge disparity. I mean, you're usually...
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Yes.
A huge disparity between.
I'll show you our salary guide, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
in the last 5 years?
Yes.
Because usually you're dealing with a 2% cost of living.
Okay, the president of the union, we just renegotiated, so I'll show you our new contract.
I'd love to see it.
Yes, because I want everyone to copy it, that's why, yes.
Yeah, I
I'll
really
show
love to
the
see
state.
it, because that's something we need to know, because it's not just anecdotal. I mean, I see it all the time, I don't want to pick out a specific group, somebody making $60,000 a year, you know, would now make $100,000 and some a year by using and abusing the system, you know, and it's a little more difficult for teachers to do that. It's not like you put in overtime. So I hate that teachers get lumped into that with correctional officers and a lot of other people, and I don't blame them for doing it. You know, if it's available to you, you're going to take advantage of it.
Well, can't you just
But
close
we
the
need to fix the
loophole? I mean,
system.
it's pretty
Right.
straightforward and simple, that you've got certain occupations that lend themselves to overtime, and clearly the word is out, they're gaming the system. Just eliminate the loophole.
Well, they did do that.
That's what we're trying to work on.
But they did do that. The doctors used to work at the university hospital, and they were also professors. And their last 3 years, they'd switch in their hospital money into the pension system. And they outlawed it. This is a long time ago, but they did that. So there is ways of, like he says, to stop the loophole. But I don't know anybody who paid 20% in the pension system. Do we?
There are people paying.
Protected status people.
Yes.
Oh, protected?
Yes.
Yeah.
20% of some of their total compensation is going into the pension fund.
Or is that because they're jailers?
No,
I mean, there is that jailer.
no.
That's another.
Yeah, I know
whole
it
debate.
is.
But if you're protected status, and now we just passed a law that you could be protected status. So
What do you think about Senator Hanson's bill of making it available to the private sector? I know he's a Democrat, but I mean, no.
I mean, I think there's a lot of retirement options that are out there for the private sector.
Yeah.
I don't think they need the mechanism of the state government to, to oversee their retirement funds. There's a
I don't
lot of
want to
options
mess
out there.
You know,
They do a pretty good job of managing our
they
pension
do a
fund.
great job.
And a lot of other people, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other money managers that do just as well too.
But I hate to put our public employees at risk. I mean, we're, you know,
What do you
obviously,
mean, Seth?
I'm self-employed and had my own business for my entire life. But for the last 15 years with the county and now with the state, our public employees have been historically paid less money than they could have made in the private sector, with the understanding the pension and the benefits were better.
Absolutely.
You know, so I understand where people got a little frustrated with Act 10, that it started to level out that scale a little bit, and the wages, you know, didn't keep up, but we also had a recession in 2008. So I think you're going to see that start to change and level back out now, just because we have a worker shortage, period.
So an example like that you were giving, and I know I talked with your staff, Senator Stroebel, about this before. In education, it's pretty rare unless you say, let's say someone gets their PhD, which costs a boatload of money to do and becomes a superintendent, blah, blah, blah. But in your business, if the governor appoints you to a agency job, right?
He said that. He
Right,
said
I
that.
know
It's
that.
abuses
No,
in
no,
our
no,
own colleagues.
I'm not
Yeah.
criticizing you. I'm saying that would be an example where someone could jump $50,000, $70,000, $80,000.
Do it every day.
I know, I'm just saying that that's something that I think people assume it's always teachers. And I think it'd be really nice if periodically that myth was debunked. And we say, you know, in our business, we've got people that get, Frank will say, let's say, gets appointed to a position, and he's making a lot more, let's say he retires, his last 3 years are gonna be disproportionate to what he made in the
Yeah, I
legislature.
wholeheartly agree with you. Dewey was upfront about that. Well, what concerns me is, I asked Brian, is there a big disparity between that 3-year and 5-year rolling average?
That's the problem.
And you're saying, not really with teachers, he's saying there is, so.
No,
I'm not saying it's 60 grand, but even, again, if it's 3 to 5, that's a calculator, that's a huge difference when it comes to, I'm at 85, I'm 85, so do my pension, that's what I meant.
Okay.
And not 60 grand, I meant 3 to 5, you know, 3 to 8.
3 to 5 is different, and what we need to do is, we've looked at options to have a percentage that would be allowable, you know, over that 3 to 5 year, if you got a promotion. We don't want to hurt somebody who got a promotion, but what we do want to do is stop these abuses where, you know, a prime example I'll use me. I was on the county board for 10 years as chairman of the board. When I first got there, I signed a waiver saying, no, I don't want to be part of WRS. Well, I have to tell you, had I taken that WRS, even with the minuscule salary I got there, it would be a huge windfall for my retirement now because I would be fully vested. I'd have 10 more years in. So I've never told my wife that. She would kill me. But
We will, don't worry.
But that's the difference. So you could be, I could be a county board chairman for 10 years and then take it, run for state assembly. That's not why I did it, obviously, because I signed off on my WRS. But now all of a sudden my retirement goes up exponentially. And then, God forbid, I get appointed to be the head of, I'll pick on you, wouldn't you love me to be the secretary or the Department of Education chair or something? And I'm making $100,000 for 2 or 3 years and I quit. I mean, that's where those numbers get drastically distorted and it hurts all of you that are in the pension system by those people who abuse it. And that's what we're trying to
Here's
do.
what you have to
We can't
consider.
lose.
The law that requires the pension cannot go above 100%. But if it goes below 100%, we can only go down to your base. If your base is lower and we're wrong and the pension gets overpaid, that just goes on to you. There's no loss. So your base might be lower, but you still get your increase to your base. If we don't hit 7%, you don't get an increase to your base. If the economy goes down, you don't get an increase. If you lock that base too high, every pension saw this, that they weren't at 3 or 5. Some are going from 5 to 10 because they need to get that base at a more accurate number so that when they give the increases, they don't drop it so bad. I mean, that's what you have to consider is not just when the amount you get when you retire, it's the amount you get over the course of your retirement that all balances out. The goal is to get you the best number for what the system currently has.
And that's what the idea, if I that percentage or kind of like, everything under this, that's fine. It's a good compromise.
That's why we're solvent, because it reacts to the performance of the market.
Well, and our pension system's unique in that it's a dual risk pension system. And true, you can't go below the floor at which you retire at, but you also share in the risk as it goes up and down.
Yep.
Not many pensions have that.
Jim,
you're last.
One last one.
Yeah,
Real quick, just
thank
maybe
you.
up
Very
in
good.
Belgium.
Very quick. I'll be very few words today. Are you aware of the pilot program Kenosha County is doing with the family treatment court for drug-offended families, where they want to treat the family members of those that are addicted? There's a pilot program that Kenosha
Dan
County is.
Margard speaks very admiringly of that program down there, and I.
Okay, now, it's new, but the whole idea is, in some of the research that we have found in looking at the heroin problem here, is that for kids who grew up in a troubled family, who ended up in a foster program, they get dumped on pretty hard. Now, I know there's been some changes because there's a couple of years in Madison, but we're hurting ourselves if we're not doing something like Kenosha is trying to do, I think. Because if kids are troubled, they're going to be the kids that are going to be in trouble, repeating what they saw mom and dad do, or their older brother and sister do. They're going to become dependent on us sooner or later, and it's going to be a bigger expense to us. We should watch that pilot program very closely, fine-tune it. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over, which we have a tendency to do, by just throwing more money at something. We do need to spend it properly in order to be able to do these things. And I guess the real question on this thing is, will you guys watch that and support it and try to expand it? Because it's going to need to come up here, because we seem to have an attitude in Ozaukee County, we don't have a problem. That's why our heroin task force has pretty much gone away, in spite of the fact that you worked pretty hard to develop that. In 2015, we didn't solve the problem. We just report it differently. We also have incentives in the wrong places, because I think to get an 88 assigned, an extra one, they look at the number of cases charged. So they're charging offenses whether they need to or not, because it adds their numbers so they can get more assistant district attorneys. We've got incentives in the wrong places. We're going to wrong places. We cannot continue, and I don't think you, in raising your family, and I know Dewey's got a lot of kids, okay? There's an old Catholic joke that said he's a good Catholic and he's not, and he's watching me, he's a sex offender. because he's, you know, he's got 8 kids now, okay? Anyway,
Good looking.
when he disciplines his kids, I doubt that you discipline them all the same. You're probably doing the same rules, but you don't treat them all the same, and we can't treat one size does not fit all in this particular problem. And that's what everybody else is talking about, exactly the same thing. We've got to educate the doctors. We did it once with the heroin task force, and they said, okay, we're done. But you know what, I talked to my doctor about it, and he said, yeah, I haven't thought about that. Gee, somebody forgot to pass the memo around. We need to get back into that heroin task force issue. We need to look at ideas. I hear we're not social workers. Well, we are to an extent, because if we don't treat those that are involved and connected and related on an addictive problem, whether it's alcohol or drugs or whatever, we're going to end up seeing their family members somewhere along the way. They're going to be a drain on society rather than a contributor to society, a contributor to the tax base. That's not what we need. An ounce of prevention is far less costly than an ounce of cure.
Agreed. I mean, we're closing, Lincoln Hills is gonna close because there's better ways to do it. And those are the things we're investigating, and we'll be implementing those changes, so.
And that was a bipartisan thing.
Bipartisan.
And I
It
think
is.
people forget
There's no
about
question
that.
about it.
I mean, it was one of the most emotional days I've spent in my 3 years in the assembly so far, was the day that bill came together for Lincoln Hills. Because it was leaders on both sides of the aisle that came together to tackle a problem. And it was bipartisan, and it really came together. We looked at all the issues. It kind of gives you a little glimmer of hope when you're stuck in the muck of Madison, that things can actually get done. And I was really impressed by that. And speaking for at least our assembly caucus, we're not done by a long shot. I think the Senate is, and addressing
I have it on
those. So there's a lot of good things coming.
I put my email on there.
Well, it's 5:30, we went a half hour over. We do have to get up to Belgium, so I guess I've got a few minutes for anybody who wants to talk to me personally about something. That'd be great, but otherwise we gotta get to Belgium. So thanks for being here, really appreciate it. Thank you.